Hi, everybody. Today I talk with Travis Fantina, someone who I've known for almost 20 years. He's built some really amazing projects, many of which I've had a front row seat in watching him ideate, build, and share his creations with everyone, leading all the way up to his most recent creation, Postalbox. We'll talk more about that, how he got started with tech, just how complicated tech has become, and how unapproachable it is for beginners, and a whole lot of other topics. So stick around. It's going to be a fun one. Travis, it's great to meet you. I feel like I've known you forever, and technically, I have known you forever. We talked about it beforehand, but 2006 is when we first crossed paths, and we, of course, kept in touch via various online meetups and so on since then on the forums. But it's great to have one on one time with you to kind of just chat about all the interesting things you've done in tech and in general since then. So before I go on, please introduce yourself.
Uh, yeah, so I'm Travis. I have a lot of interests and like a lot of little side things I'm going on about. But yeah, like primarily, uh, I like to just like build stuff and make stuff, tinker with things. I'm really interested in art and graphic design, and I think that is probably originally what led me to the Krupa forms back in 2006, I guess. And yeah, I mean, going back a little further, like school and a couple of my friends, they were the ones who did the website for it. And it was just like HTML in like Notepad, like probably just like live patching it on probably like into like a text editor on the hosting provider. But I remember watching them do it and just like thinking it was so cool that they could like turn this into this thing that like anyone in the world could see. And the possibilities for like that distribution was just so cool. I felt so connected to anyone. And it's like, like most people won't see my website, but there might be like some random like kid in, like Italy or Spain who stumbles across it. And that was really cool. So I learned enough like HTML and like, like a couple little PHP snippets, just like throw together website with like some partials and stuff. And that mixed with just like an interest in graphic design is what led me to your forms back in the day.
We spoke about core memories a little bit before we actually ended up, hitting the record button.
Mm-hmm.
For me, one of my core memories of you was not actually the graphic design work and things like that, but it's your PHP stuff. You actually love PHP, and I remember you talking all the time about it. And in many ways, you got me hooked onto PHP as well because I never did PHP before until I had to deal with it because the forums were done in PHP, but I had a very surface level knowledge of it. But you would often ask questions about PHP, and we ended up actually creating a server-side category on the forums, partly because you kept answering questions for people's PHP questions. Because at first I was always going, this is not a place for PHP or server-side questions, people, go somewhere else.
Yeah.
But, you were very eager to help. Others always had questions for it. And so I ended up creating an entire forum category, mostly so that PHP questions could go there. You were, of course, a huge contributor to it. And I ended up learning PHP. And even today now, PHP is still one of my favorite languages. So whenever I look online and people are always figuring out how do I make these basic client server interactions go when they're coming with this very complicated technology, the LAMP stack still works fine, and there's
Mm-hmm.
no reason to reinvent it. I do sound like an odd person out when I mention that, but it works, and so that's one of my strongest memories of you from back then is that you're a PHP person and you always did interesting things with like on more things like that. Like I have no recollection though of the graphic and front end stuff that you did.
uh, okay, yeah, I got a bunch of stuff that triggers like in my mind. That's pretty funny because I wouldn't, to this day I like actually know very little PHP. Like I've done it at work for certain things, but I've never really sat down and done like a full stack like PHP thing. Um, that's awesome though. I'm like glad that has seeped into your core, and if I help to like expand the forms in any way, like awesome.
Not just the forums, even as part of my day job, I help work on a team that created a web-based developer environment.
Mhm.
And one of the templates we have is a PHP template,
Oh,
purely a
cool.
backend API template, PHP based, entirely partly because of connecting the dots to back when I learned PHP and got excited about it from your content. So, it's never going to go away.
Well, thank you. I don't want to take too much credit. It sounds like you're remembering someone who like knew more PHP, or like I can definitely see myself asking a lot of questions. I don't think I was answering a lot of questions, but I'm sure I was asking a ton of questions because I was yeah usually lost in the woods trying to figure stuff out. But yeah, I just want to shout out to PHP and actually that whole stack, like you said, like the ability to like just write PHP like in a like a PHP file with like inline HTML and stuff, and just dump it on almost any server uh, is so powerful. And I think that's like something that web development unfortunately has lost with all this complexity layered on top. It's so hard to spin up like even just a basic website now. And that's not to say that PHP was simple, but I think it was approachable because a beginner like myself could just go in and find these little snippets and get them to run just by like changing the file type to like .php. And it's like, oh, index.php. Oh, wow. Now I have like this cool thing pulling in from another file, and it's just like magic. And I think that like you have to have a little bit of that to like get people who have no experience with coding, like just to get them excited and interested. If I had to like, I think back in 2006, like Rails was hot, and if I had to go through the headache of like installing Ruby on my machine and opening up the terminal, which like at that time I just thought was like a way to break my computer, if I had to do all that, it's just not very approachable for a beginner.
I think the approachability part is something we lost heavily
Mm-hmm.
because programming is still as hard as it always been, and understanding technical concepts of loops and data structures and things like that still very important. But do agree with you that what has happened in many ways since then is that it's not just good enough to know how to understand the syntax, write the code, and make your logic represent in whatever way the language expects you to do. It's also the setup and getting to that point as well, because back then Notepad, paste a file, save, upload, you're done. Now it is a combination of more abstractions that you just have no concept over, because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I could make sense of how what I'm making a change here, how it contributes to seeing something in the browser much more easily back then. Whereas today I run npm run or npm build. I have no idea what exactly is happening. What
Yeah.
exactly is all my code being transpiled into? What's it one giant bundle going? I'm uploading it somewhere, but that's also being handled by a CI/CD pipeline of sorts that
Mm-hmm.
I may have set up or I'm paying a service to handle for me. And all of it is just completely magic. And the amount of magic to decipher is just too much. And if I didn't know already the value of programming and how what I'm doing is going to be beneficial to what I'm trying to solve, I would have given up a long time ago. And I do think we see a lot of that where the kind of creative individuals who aren't convinced that it's going to be the thing they need to do, but it's going to get them on the path to getting a web page up and running or getting an
Mm-hmm.
animation or something like that. I do think we lost a large part of that audience because of the complexity of just what we're doing today.
Yeah. And one thing I think like there's this disservice that's been done in like so many tutorials and I don't know about boot camps, but just like in like sort of the more approachable things like YouTube videos and tutorials. I think they're great and they're awesome, but so often like they're chasing like I would say enterprise level concepts. So like, if there's like, and in some ways like maybe that's good to help people get jobs, but if you just want to create something, if you just want to build something, it's like maybe you don't need this like massive like over architected stack and stuff. And whatever it is, like setting up GraphQL makes so much sense for like a large enterprise, like with all these microservices and stuff, and where like little components need to be updating here and there, and there's just like tons and tons of data. But I don't think any person ever needed like GraphQL for like their starter project. But when you look at all the tutorials and like what's like intros out there, like GraphQL for a time, maybe not anymore, but for a time, it was like it seemed like it was required. And the same thing with MongoDB, like when the mean stack or the MERN stack was like so big, That's around the time I was like sort of seriously starting to get into actually programming, and it felt like if I didn't learn that, I had no chance of building anything. But there's just so many layers of complication, and it makes a lot of sense for enterprises where you have, dozens or hundreds of engineers working on something. But for one person trying to learn or just trying to make a side project, like I think there's more approachable ways to just get up and running, but they're not really talked about anymore.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that it got all so complicated?
um yeah, I think it's just people chasing like the fang companies, like like what's hot in tech is dictated by those companies, and those companies have very complex needs and massive teams and resources, and like they do a good job. Like these tools are good for what they're supposed to do. They're awesome. Um, but yeah, are you familiar with like the 37 Signals guys,
Yeah.
DHH?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
yeah. So I think DHH said, he's like, if you're trying to follow, if you like as a solo developer or a small team of like 5 or 10 developers are trying to follow like Netflix's lead, like you're gonna fail. You just don't have the resources or the requirements that Netflix does. So like don't build a stack based on like what Netflix is doing. But they're hot. Like that's cool tech, and so I think people like want to follow it, but like deep down in your gut, it's like that's too much.
Yeah. There's never going to be a world where you just send like a billion notifications in like less than 10 milliseconds around the world. Most
Yeah.
people never have run into that problem. Your to-do list does not require you to have the most complicated, several degrees of 9999 percentage uptime to
Yeah.
make sure that you and your family can store information, text-based information at that.
Exactly. And again, like I think it's if you like learning those things, that's that's a way to use your time. But it's like that's a hobby, and like it's good to have hobbies. So learn that, it'll be beneficial as a developer, but you don't have to, certainly, to get started. And in fact, my favorite quote from developer docs is from the Ruby world, stimulus reflex, which I don't know if you're familiar with that at all, but it's like
No.
it's kind of like server rendering HTML over the wire, one of those like early libraries. Um, but right at the get go, right when it's getting started, they have a disclaimer, and I love it so much. It just says like, "Are you sure you need stimulus reflex in your project? Every minute you spend learning another library is time you could spend building something meaningful to the world or with your family or out in nature. So think very carefully before you learn this library." And I love that. I love that they've had that in their docs for years. Because it's so true. Like it's a very valuable tool, but do you need it?
Yep. And I also partly think it's the complexities also caused by who exactly is writing the content these days. Back then I
Mm-hmm.
felt like it's some sort of this fun environment where we all
Yeah.
just kind of wrote stuff just because we were fiddling with it. We had fun. There was no end goal in sight. Like when I
Mm-hmm.
was writing my tutorials on Flash, I had no goal of like doing anything with that. I just did it because I enjoyed it. It was just purely a good hobby for me. And I still do that partly because I just enjoy doing animation and fiddling with technical things.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas most of the content I see today is from people employed at companies whose main goal is to try to weave in how their company's services can be used as part of doing something. And monetization in tools and frameworks and so on is almost non-existent unless you're cutting donations from GitHub or Patreon. You have to find a way to monetize, and the way you monetize is by having people pay for some kind of a service. And almost all the services are not, you're not paying for it because it's a notepad file, you're uploading a PHP file to a server. It has to be more things to make it viable. So I think the
Right.
incentive structure for making simple content in general, I think that is completely broken down. And I look at the next generation of people who are creating content. I think there's a much more difficult environment that they're operating in. It's because they don't have leisure time quite as much. I feel like as I may have had, 20 years ago, because I didn't have TikTok. There was no social media. There was none of these things that would basically keep me distracted. So I wasn't consuming content as much as I was creating content. I think that equation has flipped a bit since then, where it's just so much easier to just consume content, and the content is just so good and high quality and addictive in so many ways that I'm not going to spend what limited time I have creating the content when I can just relax, consume it, and just have fun.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. You mentioned the Flash tutorials. I think I found your site from the falling snow animation, because I was doing some Flash stuff back then. But that's just an aside. But that was a lot of fun back then. But you're totally right. I think a lot has happened, and I think, yeah, there's more opportunities to consume content. People are just less bored today.
Yeah.
Like less bored. We've traded like real boredom for just sort of like a general malaise of like, infinite scrolling, where like, everything's kind of interesting enough to go to the next one, but nothing is really profound, I think. um and then, yeah, everything is monetized, which, like everyone has to make money. It's hard times, and like I want to make money, and anything I put on the internet, I, of course, hope there'd be some financial return for in some way down the line. But that's kind of dangerous, and there's just so much pressure on it. So it's like no one can just like write tutorials on Flash because it's fun, like you were doing. Now it's like, I'm gonna write a tutorial because I want to like grow my audience, so I can get, like a YouTube play button, and they'll start monetizing my videos. Or, like, so I can just drive people to my course, which I'm selling on Udemy, or like so I can drive people to my service I'm selling, whatever. Yeah. um, and that's different. There's, yeah.
It attracts a different kind of person to create the kind of content. The type of things you create because it's just for fun. You can see it from a mile away. It's like, oh wow, this is very different. Then someone has an angle of trying to upsell you something or another. But it is because also when it comes to creativity, there's so much being written that the way master creativity and get more creative is by just having free time, letting your mind wander, not always being on high gear all the time, trying to figure out what needs to be done or what am I going to be doing next. I think that is in some ways missing as well. And there's so much also written about just the, I think, what is it called? I forget the exact phrasing, but just the lack of opportunities and open spaces where people can do something that doesn't require their phone. Those have also been slowly diminishing over the past several decades in many
Hmm.
ways. And it doesn't help, of course, that our attention is probably the most monetizable thing that companies have these days. And so every second you're not doing something is a lost opportunity for a company to figure out how can you be having your eyeballs and your attention on their product or service. And they've gotten very good at that.
Yeah, for sure. I actually just read a really good book called, How to Do Nothing: Resisting the Attention Economy by, Jenny Odell. It's a really good book. And like I kind of like, just from the title and the way it was pitched to me, it would sort of just be like, get off social media. But it was a lot more than that. It was really broad, and she delves into, of course, like the incentive companies have to like monetize your time and attention. But then she also like takes another like angle and just talks about like getting back in touch with the world around us and our community, and building communities, and like what works in a community, what doesn't, what has traditionally held communities together. um, the natural world, like it was kind of all over the place, but it was really interesting.
Yep. And I think there's another book, I think by Michael Haidt, I was reading recently. I'm probably butchering his name as well, but it's really about how do you get kids to have more attention and not be focusing on cell phones and things like that. Like the decline of a lot of indicators of good mental and social health was
Mhm.
all being going on the downside because of it. And that was a very fascinating book as well. It delved a little bit more on just how much attention people are spending in aggregate on phones and just digital tools, which when you count it, it's actually very, very high.
Mm.
My phone tells me how many hours I'm on the phone over a given week, and it's like almost 6, 7 hours, even though I'm not consciously aware of 6, 7 hours that I'm actually spending on the phone because I don't do a whole lot of social media. I don't use TikTok and all these things, but I do use email a lot. A lot of my work emails, I'm always like, emailing on the phone because it's easier. And in many meetings, I'm always emailing as well on my phone while the meeting is happening. And that by itself is a huge amount because I'm on a computer at the same time, and I'm also on a physical device, multitasking. And that 8 hours could have been 8 hours could have spent doing, like you mentioned, something more in nature or getting to understand the community more and so on.
Yeah, yeah. I'm totally with you. And actually, it's funny because I try and run like things into the ground. I had a SE that just conked out, like the first generation SE. I replaced the screen twice. I replaced the home button. I replaced the battery, and then
What is an SE?
I like an iPhone SE.
Oh, iPhone SE. Gotcha, gotcha,
SE,
gotcha.
yeah, yeah. So I had that for almost 8 years. It's like an 8-year-old phone. I got it, yeah, in 2016, and I actually just it went through the washing machine like last week, and so I'm in the market for a new phone. But there's like part of me that's like I just shouldn't. Uh, but then the thing is like it's nice to always have a camera on you. It's nice to always like make a note of something, and then when I'm at the grocery store, like I try and like I'm like a very like socially conscious consumer, so I'm always like looking up brands and stuff. So it's nice to have like a research device, but uh, it's really like it's a like a Faustian bargain because like it's nice to have like these five things, but you open yourself up to just like always being attached to the phone, and it's hard. But just getting back to what you were saying about like the time you spend, like I think about the way I use my phone and like how much time I spend on it. And on the one hand, yeah, it's like it's too much time looking at a screen and just doing nothing. But on the other hand, it's not always replacing something good. Like if you're in a meeting and you're multitasking, that's like work time where like you'd be working anyway. It's not really your free time on your own. Or like me, if I'm just like I mean, you shouldn't look at your phone before bed, but like if I'm lying in bed just scrolling through checking a few things, like people have always just sort of like read the paper or read a book right before bed. So I'm sort of swapping that with another form of just like mindless entertainment before bed. So I think that like definitely phones are a problem, but when you look at that number, it's like how many of those like 6 or 8 hours that you're on the phone every week, how many of those are actual hours that you could say like, oh, I could have been in nature for that time, or I could have been with my family? Because if it's like
That's a fair
work
point.
hours, yeah.
That's a very fair point. I think the Venn diagram would be more at work than when I'm just like waiting to pick up my daughter from some program or something, and I'm just checking my emails and doing those things,
Mm-hmm.
which would have been sunk time anyway. But I guess I could use that time to just relax and let my mind wander
Right.
a bit
Yeah.
as well. So it does creep in slowly whenever
Yeah.
you least expect it.
And that's actually, and again, like that's a really good example where it's like, yeah, it's sunk time when you're just waiting for your daughter or you're like at the DMV or something. It's like, yeah, that's like, I don't have that time to do what I want. But like you said earlier, true creativity comes from like a place of boredom and just sitting. And so anytime you pick up the phone to quell that, it's like you're missing out on a chance to just let your mind wander. So yeah, I get what you're saying for sure.
Yeah. So getting back to your background and how you got started, what was your first computer? What was the first thing you created? What was the first thing you built?
Um, yeah, my first computer. Well, uh, yeah, I remember we had a computer like from the time I was born, but it was like I think it was just like DOS based. I don't know if it had like a real graphical user interface. I don't know what it was for. I only saw it on like once or twice. I don't know why we had it. Then probably like in '96 or '97, we got Windows 95 with the just like the local computer store built like a tower and everything, the beige box. And that was my first introduction to computing. I mostly used it just for some games, like very like kids games. I was young. I was probably like 7 or something at the time, six, maybe 6 or 7. Um, had that for a couple years. When I was 10, I got a I don't know, gateway. Yeah, gateway. And that was the first computer that I started making stuff on, doing like HTML. And yeah, that was GeoCities. GeoCities. Yeah, like I said, my friends were doing the school website. My friends and I, we started a clothing company. We're all into skateboarding, and we started a company. We screen printed our own shirts, and we sold them just to kids at school and friends and stuff. That was really cool, just making shirts and like selling them. Obviously, we didn't have any e-commerce, but we put together like a website with like photos from like our skate shoots and photos of our merchandise and stuff like that. So I don't even think we had a domain name. It was just like at GeoCities, but yeah,
That's amazing. Yep, I also got started in GeoCities. That was
yeah.
like you had like 500K, 1 megabyte of space, and you had to
Mm-hmm.
drag and drop things into it. Or actually, no, that's not drag and drop. It was upload. You had a button, and you had like actually upload files
Mm-hmm.
into it. That's actually really fun. And Gateway, of course, most people are probably like, "What is Gateway?" It was the thing back then. Dell was for like people who were boring and needed like professional kind of things. Gateway was the quirky one. I think it had like the black and white cows, the spotted
Yeah,
cows was like their mascot. And then there were actually physical stores as well. Like you could just go to a Gateway place and you can get by like your stores. You can get the service. You can all these things. It was like before the Apple Store was a
yeah.
thing. There was always the Gateway store you could always go to.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man.
Yeah, I don't think I like ever went to the store. I remember like I got that computer for Christmas, and for the next several years that was like a primary thing. And I was also into film, and so I would like make home movies and stuff and edit them on that with some real like really crappy early like just I don't know editing software and stuff. Later on as a teenager, I got into like I got a Apple and got Final Cut Studio when I was like 17 or 18, and that was like real powerful editing. But
It's a huge step up in
yeah,
terms of like what people had on Windows back then and what Apple was able to provide. Because people
mm-hmm.
often go, "Why were creatives so much into Apple devices and things back then?" Because there was no good alternative. Final Cut Pro did not have anything that competed with it on Windows. Even they had tools, and of course Premiere is good. They had
Mm-hmm.
various things that could make various things work properly, but the ease of use and like the very targeted thing that it solved for was almost like unheard of. And those are some of the things that I think people always don't realize. What Apple was able to provide to the ecosystem back then.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That was incredible. Like Final Cut was such a breath of fresh air. Even iMovie, with just the free stuff, it was very different from Final Cut Pro, but it fed into it. And yeah, it really boggles my mind because I feel like about like 2011, Apple decided to like tank all their video editing, and like all their software just got bad. And I mean, fortunately, I don't know if you do that much, but like DaVinci, I think is pretty good. That's what I use, but I don't really use it for anything. But it's on my
Yeah.
computer. But
Now, I primarily use Camtasia for doing
oh,
able
okay.
to do screen recordings for tutorials to record.
Mm-hmm.
And then I use Premiere for only one thing, which is to get captions. It has a
Oh,
nice
okay.
auto caption generator that you can put it in there. People use like online services these days that can do all these things for me. But for me, I already pay for the Adobe subscription, so I already have Premiere. Why would I pay extra to some other service when I
Yeah.
do this? And also aspirationally, I'm like, I can do a lot more with Premiere than just use it for captions. I can do all kinds of
Mm-hmm.
video, color editing, and things like that. Of course, I've done none of it.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
aspirational. It's like I like having the idea that those things exist, but that I haven't learned it yet. It's just one of those things that will just never be learned. I guess.
Yeah. I had a job where I was doing Premiere all the time. I was on Windows. I was using Premiere, and it was really nice. It was kind of like it was at the time Final Cut Studio was like disappearing and being really bad, but I wasn't using it at all, so I didn't know that was happening. So I had frustrations with Premiere in some ways. I was like, I could do this better in Final Cut, not knowing that like that feature might not even exist in Final Cut anymore. But then Premiere was like actually pretty nice to use. It felt like really strange to be working at this job where I was editing videos on Windows, but it worked, and it was a nice experience.
Yep, it's very powerful because
Mm-hmm.
my primary experience with like just graphic tools in general was Flash. That was the only tool I've ever used. I even used Flash for a long time for graphic editing. Like I
Yeah.
would create vector graphics and export like 200 DPI, 300 DPI, and so on, just so I can get it like large size and look good on all these screens. And so whenever I went to any of the traditional Adobe products, which I didn't realize at the time that Macromedia had a very distinctive visual style, Fireworks and Flash and Dreamweaver had a
Mm-hmm.
interesting panel design and so on, and Adobe had their own various ways of doing it. Premiere was my first one, and I always felt overwhelmed by all these things. I'm like, why is there a timeline within my timeline, within my property inspector, within a timeline?
Yeah.
It always never made sense to me that how many levels of Inception style editing you had. I was like, all I want to do is move this text from one side to another. And then, oh, use After Effects for that. I love After Effects. And I'm like, wait, this is even more complicated. At least in that one, it was like constrained to things that make it sense for film and video. This is like a full fledged animation system where the output is going to be video formats or GIFs or something like that. So not anything interactive, which means that there's no constraints anymore. At least with Flash, with some constraints, you could only technically do these things, but the browser couldn't render these other kind
Mm-hmm.
of things. So you always had a little bit of a ceiling in how complicated things could be. Whereas with Premiere and After Effects, because everything's gonna be mushed down into pixels and frames anyway, that it was just like horrifically complex and horrifically powerful as well. Because I'm seeing now all the designers today are creating really impressive things
Mm-hmm.
using After Effects, for example. And looking at the screenshots of it, where I just see like motion paths in multiple colors and 3D lines and so on, overwhelming because again I don't know anything about it at this point.
Yeah.
But it's just great to see that there are still tools out there that people have ended up using to kind of continue translating ideas into things that can be seen on screen.
Yeah. Yeah. Although getting back to like simplicity versus you know, like we talked about with PHP, how simple that was what was great about Flash. You could do like graphic design, you could make games and websites and animate them and just do all this incredible stuff just in one program. I think it was like, if you wanted to buy it outright, like the MX 2004 or whatever, I think it was a couple $100. And that was so approachable and so easy to and that's why there was so much of it. Like that Flash animation was so ubiquitous back in the days of like Newgrounds and stuff like that. Homestar Runner, everyone was doing it. Um, and it was very easy. And now I think it's very hard. Like I don't know how you really would make that kind of animation or like those kind of interactive websites. Um, it's all been there's programmatic tools, like there's JavaScript libraries, there's After Effects and things like Lottie animations and stuff. But yeah, there's not one like kind of full stack tool that will get you there, unfortunately.
No, but Flash actually still has a life now among game developers. There's a plugin called Ruffle. Not a plugin technically, it's just a WebAssembly based compiler where it takes Swift files and it turns it into things that your browser can understand. I'm seeing a lot of people, not a lot of people, it's all relative, but I'm seeing more people than ever actually using Flash again to create these animations or interactive content and having be viewed on a Ruffle player, which works on iPhone, for example,
Mm-hmm.
without any of these complications.
That is really cool. I've seen the Ruffle screen, but I always assumed it was legacy Flash stuff. But that's neat. I saw, are they using like the last version of the old like Creative Suite 3 or whatever the last version of Flash was, or is there a
I think so. I think so. I think even today, if I were to use Adobe Animate, which is the replacement and basically rebranding of Flash in many
Mhm.
ways, and I publish a Swift file, I can actually open that in the Ruffle Player and be able to do
Yeah.
all these things. And there's another app that people speak highly of. It's called Rive, Rive. It uses the Flutter runtime behind the scenes to. It's a WebAssembly and WebGL based, But that has actually been really promising as well. I've seen a lot of really cool animations people have created using that, and I'd say that spiritually looks more like Flash from its heyday than any other tool I've actually seen. Like it actually has really good timeline tools. It looks a bit like After Effects simplified down for a modern world where the output's going to be animation and interactive animation, and that might be something to kind of look into as well. But it's definitely not like it was back in the day because I like Lottie a lot, but the challenge with Lottie, of course, is that if my After Effects composition is more complicated and you don't know what that complicated actually means, Lottie just falls apart. It doesn't quite know what to do in these
Mm,
situations. So you have no idea of, am I going too far? Are there things that could be exploring, pushing the boundaries a bit because Lottie supports it? I don't know how to enable that. So there's a little bit of a mystery there because the runtime and the tool aren't nicely integrated in that sense, and it's hard
yeah.
to know what is and isn't going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never produced a Lottie. I've like taken the files and gotten like little events happening on on one client's website, but yeah, I don't know much about the production side of it. That makes sense though. But Rive, you mentioned Rive. I have checked out Rive. I've gone to the site and like you said, aspirationally, it's like I want to learn this. I want to do something with this, and it's cool. Like it looks like in their portfolio, I think they even have like some of the Duolingo animations.
Yeah.
I don't know if they made that or if that's actually part of Duolingo's stack, but it's pretty neat to
It
see
wouldn't be
stuff like
surprising
that.
because if the output is something that works on natively on multiple devices and Android and iPhones primarily, it wouldn't surprise me if they actually are using it because what's the alternative? Embedding MP4 files essentially or AVIs.
Yeah.
But the thing about Flash also, or this back in the day, it's and I still carry this with me is there's an emphasis on low page sizes. You don't want your pages to be bloated or very large and so
Hmm.
on. And when you add Lottie, for example, I think the core runtime is about 300K, and your animation then adds more to it. And so for basically having a simple hello world swipe or something like that, you're downloading about a 1 megabyte of data that could be a WebP animation. Give file converted WebP, and then you're good to
Yeah.
go. And then you go to like Apple's website, and you're just scrolling on any product page. You're like, this whole page is about 100 megabytes, and each
Hmm.
little animation is like 20 megabytes each. And you're like probably living in a bizarre world where like, wait, what's going on? Why does nobody care anymore about that level of performance and fundamentals and things like that? Where it also seems like kind of like the old person yelling at the cloud. I feel like that person, like old man yelling at the cloud, is going to be like my tombstone picture one day, where I'm just like complaining about things that no one cares about anymore. Like, who cares if pages are like you have fiber, I have fiber, gigabit down, gigabit up. Nobody cares, if it
Yeah.
takes a little longer. Our CPUs are more powerful than they ever have been. Our graphics cards and RAM is plentiful. It doesn't matter, what it's going to take to render some of these things because our computers can easily handle it.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's funny because like I did work for a client just a few weeks ago or a couple months back now, and they were actually like a development firm and they just wanted a website made, and yeah, they're like just like make it so simple and like just keep it small page loads, like don't do any frameworks, don't bring anything in. And so I got really mindful about it to like I converted like all the images to like WebP and stuff, and I was just like keeping it small. And that that actually made me really think about a lot of these things, and I agree with you in a lot of ways. Like there's like Apple's website is so cool, and going to a website that like I know people hate scroll jacking, but I think it's cool when there's like some kind of like wild experience going on. That's really cool in a way. But more recently, I've just been thinking about the internet and like the idea of like, you can put something out there for anyone in the world to see. And accessibility is important to that. Like if you're making it for everyone, well, like you have to think obviously like just basic accessible elements like color contrast and then also proper labeling on buttons, visual impairments, other things like that. But part of accessibility I think is page size because the people on like 3G connections in the mountains. I always heard that there's so many developing nations that just like jumped over desktops and are just using phones. I think about people like that, and you know, can you save them money by not, using like 100 megabytes of data to load your page? Um, yeah, also just like efficiency. So yeah, I think I might be in your boat a little bit. I mean,
Yeah,
the whole
it's just
yeah.
it's the right thing to do. It doesn't matter. It's the right thing to do is to not have unnecessary data being sent if it is not needed. Like I go to React, I build a hello world, I use the bundler and I publish it. Why is that page 300K? Like what is possibly going on to render hello world in just plain text, no custom fonts, nothing embedded, needs to take that much?
Hmm.
And that's the world we're going into now, though. It's almost like you and I learned assembly and machine code back then, and we're telling all the people using like C++ and C, like, you're there's too much abstraction here, it's too much bloat. You can optimize it further and go all the way back. And meanwhile, all the kids are learning like, managed language like Java and Python and so on, where
Yeah.
there's God knows how much abstraction and bloat is being added behind the scenes to what would just be a simple, couple of like bit flips behind the scenes.
Hmm. Yeah. Nah, that makes sense.
And my cat decided to pay us a visit.
Oh, hey.
It's Pixel. He's
Hi,
a
Pixel.
regular in a lot of these videos that I do. Pixel, say hi to Travis.
My daughter loves cats. We don't have one yet, but maybe someday.
Oh, cats are great. I grew up with cats, but
Hmm.
my parents took care of them, so I never really
Yeah.
appreciated that. But when wife and I got a cat, he's the oldest. We have two cats. He's about 7 years old now, 1 year older than our daughter. It's a lot of fun. They take care of themselves. They're pretty
Hmm.
much plug and play, just like back in the day. It's like buying a Mac almost. You take a video camera, plug the FireWire port in, it just works. Whereas on the PC, I'm like, what driver am I installing? Is the driver correct? And what is my extra capture card? All that stuff.
Yeah.
Cats are pretty much like a Mac. They just
Hmm.
work. They have their quirks, of course, but they are litter trained. They don't require walking or constant attention. And if they are, chill, like he is, for example, they'll just greet you in the morning, greet you when you come into the house, sit in your lap, and just basically just enjoy being on your company.
Yeah. Yeah. I that's the ideal. Like, dogs are great companions, but they're high maintenance. And really to do it right, you need to be spending a lot of time with them, I think.
Exactly.
So,
It's great in the summer when you're like walking, you're like, oh, look at that. People like walking their dogs and it's great.
mhm.
But it's like middle of winter and freezing cold and, and that 5 a.m., they're like walking their dogs. You're like, I'm so happy that I don't have a dog right now. But
Yeah.
my daughter has been asking for a dog for quite some time. So when she's like, a little bit older, she can help take care of it.
Mhm.
I know we're saying that, but I was older when my parents got a cat. I did not take care of it at all.
Yeah,
And
no,
so
you
it's mostly a
she
case
won't.
where we're going to be, wife and I will be taking care of the dog, and doing all that. And of course, dog walkers and things like that to kind of
Mhm.
make some of these things more easy. But yeah, it's a crazy time with pets and kids. They actually have a lot of fun, I think.
My daughter, yeah, has been like crazy about cats since she could talk. Even before, probably just loved cats so much. And even now, like we'll go out like after work, we'll go on cat walks because like we just moved into this neighborhood. It's quiet, and so we just wander around. And yesterday, we just like a cat just wandered. I was like skateboarding. She was on her scooter, and like a cat just wandered up to us, and we are just petting it, and that made her day. But about a week ago, she's like, "Oh, cats aren't my favorite anymore. They're dogs." And I think like we went to the fire station. We were just wandering by, and the fireman like or the firefighter like let us in, and he's like, "Oh, do you want like a little dog stuffy?" And so she got this little stuffed Dalmatian. She's like, "Oh, I love dogs. I really want to get a dog." I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, just like with the cat, like we want to think about it for a while. We're not going to jump into it. We're going to spend some time. And so for about a week, it was dogs, dogs, dogs. But then like 2 days ago, she's like, "Actually, I like cats more. I want a cat."
So I guess what's preventing you from getting a cat?
um, it's funny you mentioned that. There's just like right now we're pretty unencumbered. I mean, we have a daughter and we have another child on the way. So
Congratulations.
thank you. Thanks. So yeah, so like that is encumbered in a big way, but in another way, like we've been able to do a lot of traveling and just sort of living in different places for 6 weeks, or just like travel whenever we want because I work remotely. Um, with a cat, we'd be more anchored, less so than with a dog, obviously, but that's a big pause. And then just like pet ownership in general, it's like, are we going to be able to like give it the attention it needs? I know cats are pretty hands off, but still, I don't want to neglect it. um, and then also like we're all vegetarian, so it's just weird to me to think about like getting an animal that I'm gonna have to feed meat to for like the next 15 years. uh, yeah, so
Oh, very fair points, all of
yeah.
it. So very reasonable.
But yeah.
Yeah, I feel like one of those cloud providers now, writing complicated tutorials just so I can sell people a cat. It's like,
Yeah,
wouldn't it be great for you to have like you let your mind wander? And you know what helps your mind wander? The purring of a cat. Click
yeah.
here, buy the cat. Shipped to you, in 24 hours.
Could start a cat business on the side.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, it is. It's an industry in its own because we talked earlier about just like time flying and growing up and like how much things have changed. I never realized until, my wife and I had a daughter, how much of the places we walk by normally catered to children and kids and daycares. Like for me, it's just like a building. But I'm like, wait, this is the building where you go and like you buy, things for kids, or this is a daycare facility and all of these things.
Mhm.
And similar to pets as well, in many ways, you're like, this entire block of buildings here is designed to cater to like dogs, like dog walking, dog sitting, dog washing, and dog grooming. And I
Yes.
always wondered if my hobbies and interests were slightly different, would I discover more parts of the city and the place I go by day in and day out for years on end, where I would discover something new about them that I just completely glossed over? Because to me, they're just like background characters or NPCs in like a video game lingo. I'm just like, okay, it's just there, and I keep driving by. But then as I've gotten older and my interests and responsibilities changed, those places aren't just places. They actually are doing something that is now critical to me being able to function, which is really bizarre in terms of like just how time has evolved in how our perception of things change.
Yeah, it's really interesting you bring that up, because I am in that same boat, 100%. I think the two biggest things, like having a daughter at least, is like parks and libraries. Like I didn't think about parks at all, really. Certainly not playgrounds. And then like have a daughter, and it's like hugely important. Like, how close is the nearest playground? Is it good? Like, just because there's slides there doesn't mean it's good. Like, there's all kinds of different playgrounds. That's big. And then we've been going to the library with my daughter since she was little. Anywhere we live, like library, getting tons of books. And libraries provide such a valuable service, not just for kids, obviously. Like, there's tons of stuff happening at the library that was just like out of my world. And even if I didn't have a daughter, like I would still take advantage of stuff at the library. I might not have discovered it though.
Yeah, just something about just having books that are there on so many topics. You're like, there's no distractions, so you're
Mm.
kind of forced to just take a book, look at it, flip through a few pages, and then you're might be hooked. You learn a new topic about
Yeah.
something you never have done before.
Yeah, I mean, like just from that perspective, reading, yeah, absolutely. And like, I still like librarians are great for reference and stuff. I mean, like a lot of that, like the internet and stuff is like has replaced that functionality. But I think like the internet is, as we talked about earlier, I think things are really degrading on the internet. And um, like the quality of search results aren't as good. You have to filter through a lot more to find really what you're looking for. And against that backdrop, it just goes back to the library. It's like, well, that's not degrading. Like, that's still a great experience. So if you're really looking for something, maybe not like programming stuff, but almost anything else that doesn't change so fast, like, yeah, the library is a great resource. And there's a lot more to it than that. Like, just there's oftentimes really interesting like meetups and speakers. Some libraries, like, have like other things you can take out. Like, the libraries here, like, they have parks passes. So like, if you want to get into like the national parks or whatever, you can get like a pass for the weekend and like just take it out. um a couple libraries I've been to have 3D printers. Just so there's all kinds of interesting things, equipment and stuff you don't really think about. But
And there's a human connection angle as well, because
mm,
I often talk about this frequently. Is that I feel like growing up and all of that, I run into new people all the time. I have a conversation with new people all the time. With the convenience of the internet, you are having conversations, but it's more superficial in the grand scheme of things. There's no
mhm.
like beyond. All you can see is the text or whatever you're being speaking to at the time. Nothing beyond it. Whereas the serendipitous, the magical hallway conversations, which we always joke
Yeah,
about return to office and so on, I do see a huge value in that. And that's something I really like about the libraries or doing things in general. Like when you go to a physical location and you're outside the house, you're doing something differently, just put in a different mindset where you're more open to both observing things around you, but also having social interactions as well, like the conversation with with the librarian, or if someone's reading a book that you were also reading, you're probably more inclined to go and just make small talk, even if it's smallest of small talks, which would otherwise be completely non-existent in our digital world.
yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, just to give like some weird examples of stuff that's happened at the library recently, like I went into the washroom and I was just like washing my hands. A librarian, I hope this isn't their job description, but like some staff member came in and was just like checking like the stalls and stuff to make sure like no one had OD'd in there, because like libraries attract people, like that's a place where like if you're unhoused or like kind of rough sleeping, whatever, like you can connect to the internet, which like resources, there's also just like other resources. So I think that especially as like the housing crisis has like kind of persisted, librarians have taken on a different role in that
Yeah.
regard. So that's one thing. My daughter was able to just like 3D print a couple small things at the library just for free. Um, and then also we took my daughter to like this big festival for Halloy, um, just at the library. So like three things, like nothing to do with books, but just like three community services, very like different, that I never would have expected to be at a library.
Yeah, no, I think these are all like just things that if you never went to it, you'd have never found out. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the big reasons you found out is just like accidentally stumbling upon things, as you're trying to discover what can do in the area. But
Yeah,
I do want to shift gears a little bit to talk about something you created recently, which
sure.
kind of got bring me to start chatting with you. Is you created Postal Boy or Postal Box? Sorry, Postal Box.
Postal
Dot
box. Yeah,
XYZ. Postal
yeah.
Box at XYZ. Tell me, so we're chatting right now, but in the video, for people watching it, I'll have like a screenshot of it, and you can see what's going on. But
Sure.
it basically is a way for you to write some text, put a physical address down, and then you print the message and you mail it to the address there. What got you interested in it? It's a very fascinating idea. I actually filled it out. I don't know if you ever saw it, but I actually did actually put my
Mm-hmm.
information down. So I'm looking for.
I did.
I never check my physical mail ever, but now I'm actually like, let me go check the mailbox, because the mailbox is like
Yeah.
half a block down, and like it's like
Uh-huh.
subdivision that we're in, and it's 100% spam. Like not even like, it's 100% spam. But for now, I'm actually like I signed up for USPS's like delivery notification thing where it sends me a picture of
Oh
all the
wow.
mail that's coming in, and so I'm like, okay, is this from Travis? Nope, nope. Okay, not going to check it today. Not going to check it today. But so you've actually rekindled my love of like checking the mail at some point, which I
Yeah.
never knew I had. But yeah, tell me more about the project. What got you started in it? How do you build it as well? Something I'm curious
Okay.
about.
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, yeah, I got it. I've sent your letter is there. I think it's you're on the other side of the continent from where I'm mailing these letters now. So it might take a little while. I'm in Canada. You're in the States. Sometimes that takes a while as well.
Oh,
So
depends on where in Canada you are, because Seattle and Vancouver, Canada, are
yeah.
literally about 2 hours away by driving. But I
Yeah.
think you're further east.
I actually didn't realize you were in Seattle. I lived in Vancouver for like a year and a half, and we just moved back to like kind of closer to Niagara Falls area. So that's where we're living right now. But man, like next time I'm in Vancouver, because I love Vancouver, I love the Pacific Northwest, which in Canada I guess would be called the Pacific Southwest. But I
Yeah.
love that region.
Actually.
I love that region, and next time I'm like next time I'm there for any length of time, I'd love to come down and visit you because
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
No, sounds like a plan.
But yeah, so that's another life, hopefully a future life. I can move back out to BC again. Um, but yeah, keep looking for that. Keep looking for that. But yeah, so Postalbox is just it sort of grew out of like I don't know. I come from a family of like letter writers. My dad's a big letter writer. My his side of the family, a lot of like birthday cards, and then also longer form letters as well. And so even if it was just like sort of social responsibility or pressure, like that kind of got drilled into me. I'm like very technical, and like I sort of went through a long time where I like had no use for paper. I was like, well, this is pointless. But there was always still like, oh, I gotta write a birthday card for someone or a thank you note or something, which involves like writing it. And then honestly the hardest part was like chasing down their address and a stamp and like getting those things together and then mailing it. And I was like, that like I don't like searching for addresses and I don't like searching for stamps. So like I don't I wish I could just like kind of use my phone's address book, but not like have to like write it down because my handwriting is pretty bad. So I had this thought for a long time, and then it just kind of intersected with the idea of like, you're talking about just like making the internet sort of fun again and like weird and like back in the day, people just made stuff for like just the heck of it and put it on the internet. And I was like, I just want some like weirdness on the internet. And the idea that like maybe I could like get people to write letters to a friend and instead of like an email get a physical letter, that's really cool. So I was like, well, let's just try it. Put a text box out there, you enter an address, and you just see like a week later your friend gets a letter. And it's kind of bizarre, but it's also like the most normal thing in the world. Like we people sent letters for hundreds of years, uh, and that's sort of a dying art, but it doesn't have to be. And like you said, there's an excitement to getting a letter. So if I can facilitate that or make it like easier for people with like a busy life, all the better. And that's really where it came from. Um, and I have like 100 ideas, of course, of like how to make it better. Like I've been working on like auto completion for the addresses. um Long term, my idea would be like you sign in, you actually save the address, and then like you have like an address book.
Mhm.
You could like maybe buy like 10 stamps or whatever, so you don't have to like check out every time. You just kind of have a tab. Like these are features that will come later. Right now, it's really just like, does anyone want to send a letter through the internet?
No, I think that's actually really cool. And I've always seen ideas like this people talking about, but you actually built it though, which I thought was actually really, really fascinating.
uh, Thank you.
So is your goal to essentially go big with this at some point?
um, yeah, like as big as possible, I think. Like I said, I would like to add better features. Um, and I'm kind of going to continue to toy with it and play with it, but uh, it really depends on if people use it. If I start making enough where, because right now I charge basically for a stamp plus like a dollar that
Yeah.
I get. Um, so we need a lot of people to invest in it. But I've thought about like the prospect of developing some of these other features. I've also thought about like maybe partnering down the road with like a paper company or like graphic designers to make cards. And it's like you can get like a really nice card and choose like your card stock, something like that. Kind of like it just as an upsell, but a unique little feature. So I have a lot of ideas, and I'd love to go, as big as those ideas get, and whatever people want. Like if this takes off,
Yeah, if
awesome.
you want like more unsolicited feature requests,
Yeah.
One of the things I've seen recently is that a lot of AI tools now, where you just give a snippet of like handwritten text, it can create a font, or it can extrapolate how other letters would look like if you did it. So it would even be cool to kind of say like have it be in my own writing style, where I upload like so something like I write like maybe like a few letters and numbers on this, like send you a screenshot of it, or not a screenshot, but an actual photo along with the message I want to send, and you can use that to then use like the actual message to be in the same handwriting style that I would have actually written it in. So that adds a little bit of extra personalization to it.
That's yeah, that's really cool. I actually wasn't familiar with that, and that's a very, very cool idea. Yeah.
Because I think I always like spend because I work at Google. It's been and I work in like the intersection of tooling and AI. I spend a lot of time just like being inundated with cool things people are working on. Again, like, hey, have you seen this? What are we doing here? And all these things. And so I run across really interesting things all the time. And the one about like you give it a snippet of your voice and it can create like extrapolate like how you would actually sound and generate dynamic audio things. That's one extreme. But the other extreme that gets less attention is actually this case where your handwriting can then be extrapolated into basically a typeset that can be used to create anything you want in that same style. Because it's not new. That's existed for a long time. There are a lot of tools that kind of said like draw an A, draw a capital A, and each letter could then be mapped into its own little slot, and then you go basically be able to write from that accordingly.
Hmm.
But this is one of the first few times where you just write a few letters, or just like give it a sample of like things you've written already, and it'll extrapolate all the missing characters, all the missing glyphs, and so on, which is extremely cool.
That is, yeah, that's extremely cool.
So
That would be
people are always
very
like,
cool.
how did Abraham Lincoln sound like? And they're able to like kind of, actually they can't, but
Hmm.
other people who like have like very limited recordings of their voice, they can
Yeah.
extrapolate and be like, here's how they would have spoken, some famous thing, or here's how a rap song by Einstein would
Hmm.
actually sound like using his voice. But it hasn't been done too much for letters and words quite as much yet, and so I think we're going to see a lot more things like this in the future.
Yeah, that's really exciting, and
But
that's
I love the simplicity of it, though. I think like the simplicity of what you have right now is actually what I like a lot in many ways, and
mhm.
that's always a challenge. Is that the more features you add, it gets more complicated, and then someone else comes back and I'm going to create a more simple version of Postalbox, and then there you go. The whole
Yeah.
process. Like I always use the example, and I talk about it all the time, is the idea of note taking apps. All note taking apps start off great because I'm like, it's fantastic. I can take notes and do all these things. And they slowly start adding features to it, and I'm like, nope, I can't do it anymore. I need to go to a simple note taking app, and around the same time someone would have created a simple note-taking app. Like Notion was
Yes.
a thing for a long time, and it does all these things, simple, allows you to take notes very effectively. Now Notion is a full-on CMS platform in some ways, and now
Yeah.
someone's creating probably another version of basically Notion Lite. That is what Notion was 5 years ago. Or same with what was the other one that's actually really popular? Evernote. Evernote
Yeah.
was
Oh
a
yeah.
popular thing like for the longest time, and then that became more
Mm.
complicated, more bloated, and people went to Notion, and then Notion's going to have its own cycle where someone's going to come in and use some other tool for it.
Are you in the Windows Android world or the
I'm
Mac?
in the Mac OS
Oh.
iPhone world.
Oh, okay. So, Bear Notes. I really like Bear.
Notes.
Bear is like they've kept it simple, and they get a lot of feature requests, but their development pace is glacier slow. But like as like a markdown notes app, oh man, I've been using that for eight
Yeah,
nine
I
years.
have
It's
actually seen
awesome.
this before, and it
Yeah,
does absolutely look really nice. And
yeah.
for the most part now, I just use there's a tool called Quip. I know when I worked at Salesforce, Quip was a tool that they had bought to basically get their co-founder at the time, Brett Taylor, to join them. And it's a very simple note-taking app, has simple collaboration features you can share with people, but
Mm.
it works in the browser, works on any device, and that's been
Ah,
pretty
yeah.
convenient. But I use Apple Notes for the most part in many cases
Okay.
as well. Especially when I'm just need to jot some ideas down very quickly. I use that.
It's
But
been a
Quick
long
IP
time.
is a pretty good one. It's free, works for your Gmail account, and you're good to go on that.
Okay, I'll check it out. Yeah, because it's been a long time since I've actually even Apple Notes. I haven't looked at it. I've been using Bear for so long, but yeah, I'm always interested in like what's changing, how the landscape of these things changes, and I also really appreciate the craft of things and like a well designed app, a well functioning app. So
Yeah,
um,
and and of course, pencil and paper and notepad still works really well, also. And
yeah,
I do have like so many post-it notes just strewn around my desk on like various things that I just jotted down ideas for. So it's like yeah, it's not a cohesive story by any means in my note taking world. I have notes, I have Quip, I have physical notes as well. And I'm sure when I want to look for something, I can never really find it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I actually started carrying like little like field notes or just like tiny little like pocket sized notebooks. I started doing that a couple months ago, just again to like be on the phone less and have something I could pull out and like doodle on rather than like using my phone. So I'm in the same boat, like fragmented note landscape, notes everywhere. Um,
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of people using like a stylus on like an iPad or like a Chromebook to like take
mhm,
notes. And I haven't quite gotten into that yet, because I will say the Apple Pencil with the iPad, extremely nice in many ways. Like little design touches they've added, little details they have,
mhm.
and the responsiveness where when I'm actually writing, there's no lag between my finger and like I mean my stylus and then like what's actually being seen.
Yeah.
But I think if they ever make it a phone thing, I might consider using it. But I don't want to carry another iPad along with my phone at places when I might need to just take notes.
Yeah, exactly.
Because people just say your retention, your memory is better if you actually physically write things down as opposed to like typing it. And I don't know how true that is, but if that is the case, then there may be something to be said about being able to have the physical form of writing things down.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. Um, yeah.
But getting back to Postalbox,
Yeah.
and so are you using Tailwind?
Uh, partially, in a
I think so. 'Cause
way.
I looked at the view source and looked at some of the column names and things like that, which is really cool actually because most examples of Tailwind I've seen are like extremely complicated things, and you
Yeah.
made it very simple with this actually.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about the tech stack. This is what I think I'm really excited about. Not because it's different. I just love talking about this stack, but um, so it's actually Elixir and Phoenix. Um, and that's what I do everything in now because I've been developing with Elixir professionally for the past 5 years, so I just know it very well. And I don't, we talked about learning new things earlier, and I love to learn new stuff. I've got like 5 languages I want to learn and 10 frameworks I want to learn, but I'd rather build things. I'd rather just like make stuff than learn stuff at this point. So the learning usually takes the back seat, and I just make stuff with what I know, and that's Elixir and Phoenix. Phoenix comes now with like Tailwind sort of out of the box, so actually, there are some very nice flourishes. I think like the Phoenix, whoever's doing design for the framework, just has a really good eye. So there's a lot of like sensible, like nice defaults with the install, but I'm not like a huge Tailwind fan, and so a lot of the custom CSS is just me. Like I sort of have my own system that I created and have worked off of. Um, have you heard of Utopia?
Utopia, is it a CMS?
No, it's like a. If you type in Utopia CSS or utopia.fyi is their website,
Utopia.fyi.
and it's like fluid modular type scales. And so like basically instead of having like responsive breakpoints, they use clamps to basically like dynamically change the size of everything
Raising
based on
confidence
screen size.
shouldn't be this complicated.
Sorry, I clicked the video,
No,
but
that's okay. But yeah,
yeah,
like
I've never heard of
it's
Utopia. It actually, because I'm looking at your markup, I do see that a clamp,
mhm,
like mentions in the attributes, and
yeah.
yeah,
So
never heard of this. It's really cool.
so I kind of yeah. So I've been using Utopia for a little while, and it's not like a framework. It's just a system, and they have you can generate different sizes on their site. You could do it yourself as well with just CSS and math, but it's a little complicated. So I just use their inputs and copy the CSS over. But um, it's funny, like because this is a personal project. It's actually like maybe like the worst example of my work because, you know, are there a lot of tests written? No, not really. Is like all the markup perfect? No, not really. Are like some things half baked? Yeah, but it's like it's just like how can I get this done as fast as possible so that people can start using it? And I've had so many projects that I like overdeveloped or spent years on, literally in some cases, that never went anywhere. And now I just want to say, like, I have an idea. I want to try and do it in like a couple of weeks and put it out almost as like just a standalone single page. How far can we get with that? Because I don't want to keep wasting time on things no one's going to use. And so even like Postalbox, like if, you know, no one continues to like send letters with it, I'll just let it die. You know, the domain
Yeah.
can expire in a year, and that's fine. Um, I like the idea. I'm glad I did it, but if it's not going to go anywhere, I don't want to keep spending time on it. So
Yeah, and I think that so many people get caught up in just building and building and building without actually shipping something and seeing if it actually tracks. So I like how you have it where you talked about have it very simple. Here's the simple ideas that I have, and then in the future I'll enhance it with more things. Whereas I think less experienced or less seasoned developers would probably not ship even the first version until they got everything up this like figured out first. Which is often a huge miss in so many ways because
mm-hmm.
you learn so much from the initial feedback you get from people, and you might even be taken in a direction that you never thought you would have gone because of that initial ideas that other people have for it are interesting enough where you want to pivot, which you would have never been able to do if you spent too much time on it.
Yeah, yeah,
No, that's really cool. I also like how you're the classic red and blue envelope style design. It's a gradient and not an actual GIF or a PNG that has been a background you loop.
yeah, yeah. That was I love those like those CSS gradients. It's so cool what you can do with them.
Exactly. These are some of those times where I'm always like, if only we had tools that made these things like this easier to do. But there are a lot of gradient generators that help you create this on its own.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where it kind of gets back to if you were not, if you weren't familiar with building websites and building some of these things, that even doing something like this would be almost impossible for someone to get started and to get up and running doing some of this.
Yeah, yeah. Um, sorry, I was just
Did
yeah,
you
I
find a
can't.
bug while you're chatting with me about something?
No, I didn't. But I actually, I can't even. I'm not positive how I did it, but I have on my personal website, which is just travisfantina.com. I've got buttons, and if you hover the buttons, I don't remember if it's a gradient, but there's a really like. I don't think the design is great on this site, but I'm so proud of these buttons. I'll never let them die.
Oh, I
Um,
like it a lot. Oh, that is
uh,
great. Do you remember like the art style of many of the Flash sites from back in the day, where you had like shapes, and then you had like lines like that to simulate depth of various sort.
mhm. Yeah,
Almost
I
like
love that.
was it PlayStation that had something like this? Oh, I like the theme picker you have on your.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
thanks. That's called like not being able to commit to a color scheme.
yeah,
You had like a pretty cool theme. Actually, you still do. Right. Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
on your
I have a
website.
theme picker. I have like so many colors. Again, I couldn't figure out what color themes to use as well,
Oh, it's
and so I
so
think I have like
nice.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, and then light and dark versions of all 8 of them.
Yeah. Ah, it's no, I like I think like definitely your site. And there's a couple other like designers who like they just had like a couple palettes you could choose. I always thought that was really cool. Even actually like before light and dark was a thing, back in the day, like even when Facebook was new, I always thought it'd be a cool feature if like right up on the that blue bar at the top. Back, I don't know what it looks like now, but back there was like just like a blue bar. I was like, I'd love to have essentially what you have on your site, just like a couple color squares, and you could just like just change the color of that
Yeah.
bar and like the accents, and that's it.
I always wish they had that, small amount of personalization to make it your own. But that goes completely against, I think, what all these companies in many ways stand for, because it's
Mm-hmm.
really about how do you take the individual out of all the things you're doing? How do you take personality out completely? and just have the content and be the only brand you see be that of the surface you're currently in. And
Yeah.
it's something I often talk about, why I'm like, why it's important for content creators who are content creators to own their content and not be dependent on other platforms. It's partly because at the end of the day, there's no incentive from them to actually make your content be better than any other content if it doesn't serve their very unique interest, which is like, kind of sell more ads, can I get more eyeballs on it? So the algorithms and everything's tweaked to basically make it seem like you're on LinkedIn, you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, you're on all these certain, on YouTube. You're not on Travis's profile. You're not on
Hmm.
Travis's thing. You're on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn has a link to it. The top level umbrella brand cannot ever be you. You can never be bigger than that. It has to always be the overarching
Yes.
company you're on. And that's something I've always been worried about, and always like, if I had a pet peeve, it would really be that, is how do we just keep all of the information we're doing from being completely siphoned off? And I think with AI, it's getting even worse in so many ways, because this is like the holy grail for these companies, because they finally found a way where they can completely bypass you as a brand and or a creator, and be able to regurgitate the same content in a way where it's only through OpenAI, or only through Gemini, or only through any other AI system.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. And like, I think the truth is, I think society is like going to split. I was thinking about this a lot a couple of years ago when they first started like talking about AI in movies, AI screenwriters, AI, character generation, all this stuff. I was like, like Disney, the big companies, they're going to go after that because it's a very effective way to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
But there's people are always going to want to tell stories, and some people will always want to go to the stories that people are telling. And so just like indie films haven't taken over the market, like, it's still just like the big studios, it's their world. But there's still a niche of, indie movies that make good money. And I think like with AI, that's kind of almost happened in society where it's like the flow of everything is going towards like the AI generation. It's too easy to get caught up in that. But if you look, you can find like the weird, wonderful, like human alternatives out there, and some of them will be, like utilizing the best bits of AI. Some won't be, but it's just like finding those weird places, and it's on the internet especially. It's about breaking out of the silos and like finding sites like krupa.com where it's just, it's fun and it's whimsical and it's so unlike, just like a news feed or something, or like Postalbox, just like a weird project one person did. I love finding sites like that, and I think that the internet is pretty saturated with big social networks and like monoliths, siloed sites. But if you break out of that, you can find some really neat things. um, it just takes a little effort.
And that is very true. And it's probably one of the best positive ways we can end our conversation here, Travis. So, it was a blast talking with you, and can't wait to see more cool projects you create. And we'll chat more about it when that happens.